Deborah.
Okay.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. There's a 10-second gap before they tell me it's live. Yeah, we're live now. So hi friends, welcome to the another webinar of Career 360. This time, I thought we should actually understand and talk to a person who would be able to guide most of us in terms of how education must be, what the world has learned because of COVID, and how the world is facing the problem that is being created by COVID as an opportunity or as a threat. And more importantly, I think this is an event that none of us have seen. In fact, my mother was telling me in the morning that even in World War II, it seems there was never a lockdown of the world. What we're seeing today is much beyond what the world has ever seen. You can talk of Spanish flu or anything, but nothing of this nature has ever been seen by anyone. And while we're seeing this event, the colleges are shut, the schools are shut, the universities are shut, but education seems to be seamlessly going on. It is just that it is going on from the confines of your homes. The students are learning what they have to learn. So, in a certain sense, the other day I was talking to a very senior economist who came on my show, and he was saying that it's as if EdTech has leapfrogged by about a couple of decades. What we would have adapted 20 years down the line, we've been forced to adapt today, and it seems to be working very, very seamlessly. And today morning, Deborah was sending me an article which I've already read, Deborah. I do follow Michael Moore very closely because that's what is very important for people like me. And he said that beautifully. He said, some of these new online learners will sink, some will crawl out of the pool and never go back in. But we believe most will get the hang of it, like it, and will no longer be confined to the shore. Effectively, the genie is not going back in the bottle. Digital learning has come of age. We have a before coronavirus and world transition to after coronavirus or after disease, as he said. So in a certain sense, the online technology that people have started adapting, most of them will start liking it so much that they might not want to go back to where they came from, which is as early as February of this year, So in 2 months, the kind of transition that we've seen is dramatic. And this is what I wanted to discuss today in terms of what are the changes that the world has seen? How did the world adapt to it? What are the new technologies that are helping the world? And to help us go through this entire conversation, what we have is, I requested Deborah because Deborah, I've always admired you with the way you went about conducting ASU Summit. I've seen the best of the educationists being a part of that summit. You want to talk to anyone, and I'm telling the three of you also here, you want to talk to anyone, you just landed up at ASU Summit, right from venture capitalists to investors to innovators to educationists to edupreneurs to anything. About 5,000 people under one single roof. There is no better place to meet up with the world of education, as they say. So, which is where I thought that because she's in touch with all these people and she would be interacting with all these people, she would know the best cases, the best practices that the world is following. And which is where I requested Deborah to be a part of this conversation, and she's gracefully accepted. Thank you so much, Deborah, for accepting this.
Absolutely, delighted to do it.
For the people out there, let me introduce Deborah to you so that you understand the context in which she is sitting here. She's the managing partner of GSV Accelera TE, a venture capital fund investing in the 75 billion education and talent technology sector. In addition, she is the co-founder of and managing partner of the ASU GSV Summit and founder and senior advisor of GSU Advisors. Now in its 10th year, the ASU GSV Summit celebrates innovations and innovators across the global pre-K to grade learning and talent landscape. Deborah currently serves on many boards, including Ascend Learning, Degree, the Educational Trusting Service, which is called ETS in India, Fairy Godboss, Lightyear, and Remind. She's also on the board of Dean's Advisors at Harvard Business School, the Khan Academy Thought Leadership Council. Deborah graduated from the Princeton University, and she did her MBA from Harvard University. Thank you so much for joining us, Deborah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and three people in conversation with Deborah would be Aakash Chaudhary, Director and CEO of Aakash Educational Services Limited. Hi, Aakash. We have Subrat Mohanty, who is the Group President of Manipal Education and Medical Group. Subrat, dabbles between for-profit, not-for-profit, and so on and so forth. So I felt, in the sense, the group dabbles with everything. So I thought it was important to have that perspective. And we have Dr. Shekhar Vishwanathan, Vice President, Vellore Institute of Technology, one of the largest engineering universities in the country. So I will start with you, Deborah. What have you seen, in the last 2 months in the world in terms of how they're facing this this corona, the COVID, and how is education evolving in the process?
Yeah, I think it's as you said, and as my partner Michael Moe has sort of codified this BC before Corona, BCAD framing, before Corona, after disease. What we've seen, and we look at it as a pre-K to grade landscape. So we look at students, early childhood students, K-12 students, higher education students, and workforce students. And what we've seen, and certainly I'm going to be a little parochial in my U.S. bias, although we're clearly looking at it globally as well, because many of the companies that are seeing the biggest upward sort of velocity are companies that are very much global. So I think that obviously schools were shut. We were actually we were in the Middle East when they began to shut. They shut ahead of a lot of other places, and kind of got a window on that. Flew home to Chicago, and subsequently had all the U.S. schools begin to close, followed by sort of universities. So I think that what we've seen is, my partner Michael says, we basically saw 1.6 billion people forced online, effectively overnight. And I think that there is we completely agree with the concept that the digital learning space, we call it kind of the dawn of the age of digital learning. We think the space will see a tremendous acceleration. I think originally we had, and we look at kind of it akin to what happened to e-commerce between 2004 and 2019. But today, effectively, digital learning is 160 billion globally. About 2.3% of the overall education market. Originally we had been forecasting, and others have been forecasting, effectively a double between here and 2026. I think to about 4.5% of the overall sector, 440 billion. I think we actually now believe it will be, a double on a double. That we should expect to see it be about 11% of the category by 2026, or $1 trillion in terms of overall global size. And it's interesting. I think that there are many positives to your point. I think there will be people who are having great experiences. We've actually talked to university faculty in the U.S. and India, actually in other places, where the experience for them has been that students are more engaged. They're actually showing up. They're showing up for class with actually in higher numbers, and more, and enjoying the experience. On the flip side, there is a large, certainly in the U.S., there's been a lot of polling about this. Not every university was, for example, or school district certainly, was prepared to go online. So the experience is going to be, it's going to be a barbell, right? You're going to have folks who have great experiences and really don't want to, go back to what what was normal, the old normal. And then there'll be folks who had really bad experiences, and are going to try to figure out what the right answer is going forward. But under any circumstances, it has, for faculty who are reticent to teach online, that's no longer an issue. It's a little bit to us like the catalyst that occurred when MOOCs appeared in the 2000 timeframe. I think the biggest impact of MOOCs in that initial phase was that it basically eliminated the debate, the institutional debate about the worthiness of online learning, because suddenly you had great brand universities willing to go online, and some faculty, not all faculty, some faculty willing to be part of that. So that was the sort of first impetus, in my view, to widening the aperture of online learning. It sort of changed a lot of attitudes. I think Khan Academy actually was also a really important catalyst in the K-12 segment of the market. What Saul did globally with taking, flipping the classroom, putting that on, I'd sort of say that is version 1.0, and now we're, this crisis has generated version 5.0 or something like that. So It has, and I'm sure in India it's the same. It has, I'm very hopeful that we'll have positive outcomes once everyone recovers from the very dire financial impairment that has occurred for individuals and companies and cities and states. The inequities that have been surfaced in this all going online. So the fact that many districts, some large school districts in the U.S., Berkeley, Oakland, where students could not, there was not enough equity. Students didn't have devices, they didn't have Wi-Fi, and some districts just chose to make the decision not to basically shut down learning, because if it was going to be unfair learning, they weren't going to deliver learning. We can debate the merits of that decision, but I think I'm hopeful that this has re-elevated the discussion in the U.S. At least. We had this phase of getting schools wired, and we succeeded at that. Schools are wired, and now we have to address how do we get low-income students devices and Wi-Fi access. And it's not, and I'll stop and let questions. To me, it's not just about remote learning, although I presume there will be requirements that every school district in the country has a plan for being able to switch on a dime to remote learning. It actually speaks to the fact that low-income students are not able to learn at home in a modern fashion. So it is, when we go back to whatever is normal, it's pretty important that in the time that students are at home or not in school, which is the majority of their time, that they actually have access to modern learning. And I think that, to me, is and I believe that this crisis is going to put appropriate emphasis on this, incredible gap the inequity gap that exists around students being able to get access to what they need, which is great educational resources anytime they want them. So it's been fascinating. We can talk segment by segment. The higher education segment here in the U.S. Is going to be decimated. Parts of it are going to be decimated. The traditional sector, the physical sector, we are going through. Not only are their endowments have been hit badly to the extent you had an endowment, and not, it's actually not a lot of universities have large endowments, but the ones that did have been severely affected by the stock market crash. And then they've gone through this whole piece of the cost of dealing with COVID, and then they've had to return funds to students, which has been just a very dire financial outcome for them. And now there are all kinds of class action lawsuits around, do you have to return tuition, or if you're online, do you need to return part of tuition because online should be lower than physical? So all kinds of dynamics that we won't know exactly how they play out. And anytime in the near future, certainly over the next year or 2 years, we're going to continue to see the impact to the traditional higher education sector in the U.S. And certainly the universities in the U.S., and there are a number of leading ones: Arizona State, Purdue, Western Governors, Southern New Hampshire, others. The ones that were actually already delivering very high quality online learning are picking up share, and will continue to aggregate share because they were ahead of the game. So it's all quite interesting.
Okay. Deborah, you also said earlier, and I read Michael Moore's article where he talks of 11% share as far as the new online medium would take over, or technology will take over, and that's about $1 trillion. That's about 5x of where we are today, as I look at the numbers. Am I right in saying that?
That's right.
But,
that's right.
So, do you expect this $1 trillion? What are the spaces where you think this growth will go towards? What kind of education?
Yeah, I think it will certainly a large chunk of it will be in higher education. Okay. So if you look at the numbers, and you're roughly 207 million higher education students today. That's going to double in the next decade. So by 2030, there'll be something around 440-ish students looking to receive higher education credentials. So that's not possible that will be accommodated in physical circumstances. In the in developing countries like the U.S., we actually are seeing, because of our population decline, seeing declining enrollments, but is likely, will, as it typically does, and I think we're already seeing it. A recession typically pushes people, when you're furloughed or laid off, people go back to school. So I think we will actually see some climbing numbers in higher education in the U.S. Above what had been expected, in a full employment economy that we had before this. So even developing countries should get an uplift in students seeking higher education. But I think it's going to force them. I think there's going to be a much more aggressive look at what online alternatives are. There's some really fascinating emerging models around, that are sort of non-traditional models for online learning, in addition to the schools that I mentioned earlier. So I think and higher education is an enormous industry globally. So I think a big chunk of the 5 times growth will come out of the higher ed population. I think we're also going to see, what was obvious before this crisis was that we have hundreds of millions of working adults who need, upskilling and reskilling. And those, and that was a problem that existed before with the layoffs that are occurring now. And, they continue every day you wake up and read the Wall Street Journal. It's another, 30% cut at some major corporation. With what's happening now, you're gonna see even more need in the working adult population, or the adult population that wants to be working. A desire for upskilling, reskilling, whether that's in technology skills or other areas of expertise. We were just talking about RPA before the call started. Talked to UiPath yesterday. They provide free education programs for anyone looking to develop skills around RPA, and they've seen a big uptick, for example, in demand since the crisis. So I think that there will be a material increase in the demand for adult learning, particularly as it relates to upskilling and reskilling, for people to have job mobility. So I think, a little bit here is interesting. I think some companies had been, I don't think any company hoped for this, what has happened. But I think some companies prior to the crisis had been looking for an opportunity to perhaps trim their workforce, because automation had had them in a position where they probably had some excess labor. And so, as I said, nobody in their wildest imagination wanted it to happen like this. But I think that will now have happened. And so anyway, so I think there'll be big demand on that piece. So and then you kind of go to the third big wheel, which is the K-12 side. I really think all the boats are going to be lifted here in terms of numbers. So I think, on the K-12 education piece, which is the most problematic in the U.S., in terms of change and rate of change. But I think we certainly will, we haven't had sort of requirements for large districts. I'm actually doing an interview with the superintendent of Miami-Dade, which is one of the largest and most successful school districts in the U.S. Next week. And, they actually turned on a dime and went remote because they had a plan. They were ready. They had been, they used it. It wasn't viewed as unusual. They actually use, digital learning to enhance, delivery of learning for their K-12 students. And so I think you're going to see parents requiring that school districts all over the country have parents, governors, legislators. There's got to be a plan. You have to be, this is, we can't assume this is the last time this is going to happen. And we have to be serving our low income students equitably and frankly, and all of our students. But I think I would guess that middle and upper income districts probably turned on a dime, had more resources and turned on a dime faster than some. But anyway, I think there will be a big demand, really across all three pieces of this pre-K to grade continuum, for, more expansive, more scaled solutions to effectively raise the digital bar for all learners.
So what you're saying is higher ed, upskilling, and K-12 in that order is the one that will take a big chunk of it.
I think so. I think so, because I think you're going to have higher ed is going to get the biggest influx of people. The workforce, the upskilling and reskilling, given the damage that's been done to companies, is going to probably need to just take their, companies are going to need to, we're seeing companies hang in there and support learning as a critical piece so far. But I'm guessing that companies are going to have more to deal with in terms of how they pay. How do we finance, getting millions and millions of workers reskilled, upskilled? And the government's going to have a very major role, right? Because,
And there's another thing that's playing out, Deborah. Like yesterday, a couple of flights have landed in Singapore and US from India. Indian students, they've been turned because I think the student visas are stalled.
Yeah, I can't. I'm losing you a little. I'm losing you a little bit. Is it?
Okay. So if you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
So yesterday, a couple of flights have landed in US and Singapore with students from India, wanting to study there with student visas properly given. But everyone with a student visa has been turned back, right? I do think that the study abroad is the first segment that's being very, very badly hit as we see along. So where do you see the study abroad as a segment going forward?
Yeah, and that maybe, Aakash, that's maybe what you were talking about. I think study abroad is difficult for a number of reasons. One, I think just getting it goes along with everything, all kinds of travel. I think people are just not comfortable yet. I think that's a global phenomenon. I was talking to someone in the Middle East, in Dubai yesterday, and they felt like the U.S. would be the last country that would get kind of comfortable with travel. I don't know exactly why that is, but so I think you're going to have a year. Higher ed's going to lose a year here, right? You're already seeing universities in the U.S. delaying till January. You're going to have the impact of some universities not operating. Online universities obviously are fine because they always have been online. But I think you're going to see study abroad programs and things like that are going to lose a year, and that may push students to actually find better alternatives closer to home, and that market may never fully rebound. So we'll see. I think that
Deborah, is it only the travel ban? Because I do think that we are becoming narrower. We are no longer the global village we wanted to be. Countries are creating walls around themselves to protect their own people, which is natural in these kind of circumstances. So do you see that the fact that you cannot settle down there and immigration becomes a difficult thing, that you actually see the study abroad segment falling much more than just what travel enables them to do?
I don't, in the long run, I don't, because I think in the short run, certainly in the U.S., higher education is going to be highly dislocated. And I think you still have, even, Harvard Business School, which is, not exactly a case study for most people, but they're even still, we have a young woman who works for us who got accepted and is supposed to start in the fall, and they're really encouraging people to take the year off. So, so I think you just got the dislocations of institutions not, and they're assuming, and institutions, Harvard, a month ago was already worried that international students were not going to be able to get back, either because they didn't want to come back, or because their own country was banning travel, or because there were going to be obstacles here. So I think we just have a bit of a lost year, unless you're willing to learn online, and just, you know, plow forward with that. So I think the jury's still out on how many schools plan to open. Connecticut actually just put out a big piece that was led by Rick Levin, the governor of Connecticut. Rick Levin was the former president of Yale, is a member of our advisory board. Rick, they put out a big study around opening, and they actually are suggesting an opening in the fall. So that it's a carefully laid out plan for the universities in Connecticut. There are a lot of universities in Connecticut, and it's a very methodical plan that assumes they can put in the right measures to actually have a safe, you know, have safe openings, carefully, with all kinds of restrictions and precautions. So I think
universities will.
Yeah, sorry.
Came back that about 1,000 universities in US will get into a problem post this thing, and you also used the word decimated earlier. So number, you know, how many institutions do you have, and how many do you think will get into a problem post this thing?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, there are 4,400, you know, roughly colleges and universities in the country, and I mean, interestingly, community college, I mean, I just had someone tell me this yesterday, community colleges are our 2-year universities that tend to be, serve local communities, hence the name community colleges. There's an equal number of those. Community colleges apparently are actually seeing really strong enrollments, because one of the things that's happened here is that students don't want to leave home. They want to actually go to school near where they live. So this is anecdotal from a company that serves that market, but apparently there is some strength in there in the enrollments there because students want to stay put and not get on planes. So I think there's been all kinds of speculation. We did a call with Dan Rosenzweig, is the CEO of Chegg, which is a $7 billion public company serving the higher education market, 2 weeks ago. And Dan, suggested that the number could be 25% of those 4,400 that end up in a financial position that does not allow them to go forward. We already are seeing some close. I think there are a few pressures. It's, we had for traditional universities, there were declining enrollments anyway, in particular in the Northeast and the Midwest. All the population growth, the population growth that exists in the U.S. is on the West and South. So, and a lot of traditional universities are in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic and Midwest. So those were already under pressure. You had, private colleges with small endowments now facing all these liabilities and enrollment pressures, liabilities in terms of having to return funds to students, and then their endowment's under pressure. So it's just a triple whammy. The public state universities, I live in Illinois. We're a state that is known to be is sort of running neck and neck with, New Jersey or something, as being in the worst financial condition of, state in the country. California's got some equal issues, but there's already speculation about how much money is going to have to be cut from the Illinois university system because of the impact of COVID and the funds that are having to be allocated for unemployed workers in Illinois and businesses and that sort of thing. So, on the public side, I think on the public side, we're going to see just state budget pressures that we saw in, 2008 was devastating for public systems. They've just sort of climbed their way back. So I think there's a lot of effort happening in Washington, D.C. With great groups like ACE, which is run by a wonderful person, Ted Mitchell, who is a good friend of ours, who used to be an undersecretary of education in the U.S., trying to get as much, many dollars allocated to the higher education segment to keep it going, as possible, because it's pretty dire. I mean, there was a very good editorial in the New York Times, I think, this last couple of days, about the Pennsylvania system, which is was under real pressure. Their public system was under real pressure coming into COVID, and now cannot take the state coming in and dropping support even further and hope to survive. So that's it does put, and then I'll put on top of that, it's interesting. There've been some surveys done, and generally students students are really thinking about other, particularly incoming freshmen are in large numbers are giving real consideration to just doing something different. In not going to school, even if school's open, whether it's digital or physical, and whether it's a gap year, whether it's going to work somewhere, whether it's doing a boot camp you can do online. So that factor is also pushing students into thinking less traditionally and more about what they can do to acquire skills that lead their way to good jobs. And
I think that's a very interesting thing, Deborah, because what I would do is on this one, I'll ask Subrat to step in, because Subrat handles a lot of programs on skills and upskilling and those kind of things. And obviously, the group also handles a lot of universities in India and outside of India. Subrat, would you take over? And you see, because I do see a drift towards students, the current set of students moving away from formal education and attempting something different. So
I'll give you one funny poll that Kaplan did before we jumped to that. So they did a study earlier this year before COVID, and they basically polled millennials and said, if you were given a choice between a Harvard degree and a Google technical certificate, I can't remember which certificate, what would you pick? And the vast majority picked the Google certificate. Which is a big change. I mean, that's pretty fascinating. And I think this will just keep pushing people more and more and more that direction.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Mahesh. I think, Deborah, just to give you a broad sense of the landscape, we've got over 20 million students in the higher education space in India, and that still represents about 27% enrollment. And considering that we are still a young country with more than 50% of our population under the age of 25. If you take the next 10 years, we should be having at least 3x to 4x of these numbers in higher education. But we've been having sort of 2-3 issues that we've been dealing with over the last decade or so. One is just the regulatory element in terms of how easy is it to actually go and offer online degrees, online courses, and the other one is the pricing or the cost of the programs. So what's happened, interestingly, post-COVID is, what Lenin once said: there are decades when nothing happens, and then there is a week in which decades happen. And I think we are at that stage because there is already move towards online. Classes are happening online. Examinations possibly will happen this semester online. So the point really is, for this kind of a market, for this kind of a size, and eventually India will come back to the growth path, and we will continue to have a 6 to 8% annualized growth rate. So this is clearly a moment of reckoning in terms of what does a university degree truly give you. It gives you credentials, you signal to the market that you have a degree, and hopefully it allows you to get employment because of that certificate. But for the kind of volumes that we were looking for, and the fact that now online, in some sense, most universities have seen that it works. It's not something that is absolutely a difficult thing to transition to. How would you look at the opportunities that are available for entrepreneurs in a market like this? What kind of solutions, what kind of spaces to look for, and what do they do to make themselves really useful to universities in order to capture an opportunity like this, both for formal degrees as well as for the plethora of certificates and skill based programs. Also, mind you, we possibly are looking at an opportunity of a lot of production and manufacturing capabilities reshoring from China. based on what we have seen. And India is making an all-out effort to possibly attract that kind of work as well, move to India. So your thoughts would be great in terms of what opportunities entrepreneurs should possibly look out for, and what might attract universities in terms of solutions.
Yeah, I think that, and I think it's all around this education to employment, the concept of education to employment pipelines. And I think it's interesting in this conversation I had yesterday, it's been a hard slog in the US, right? Because universities, traditional universities have for so long flinched at the idea that you go to university to get a job, right? And so it's been, it's taken a long time, and some really innovative universities becoming important and delivering high, what we like to call return on education, but really high quality education online and offline for that matter, related to employment, to sort of begin to break that bugaboo. So I think that, and we're seeing here lots of education to employment, it's lots of entrepreneurs partnering with universities to help them deliver courses more quickly that they cannot possibly produce from their traditional curriculum production, machine or process. And so boot camps, for example, have partnered with universities all over the country, and I think increasingly all over the world, to help deliver different sets of skills, whether it's computer science skills, or whether coding or mobile, whatever, and then even outside of the CS stuff. So I think educational employment, and I think the factory work piece fits there too. I think we've even seen it. Some really good companies. A public company called 2U acquired a company called Trilogy, and Trilogy basically figured out that there were huge populations sitting in extension schools at universities, and they were far less. And it's an unregulated really piece. It's unregulated is the wrong term, but it's not the same formal regulation as the degree granting part of the university. It's basically there to help working adults, pick, go do extension schools in different specific career areas. And there's some, Rutgers University, for example, has over 200,000 students in their extension school programs. And so there've been entrepreneurs who figured out that you can plug it, and it's both alumni as well as community members who want to be part. You don't have to be an alumni to be part of an extension school. Harvard's extension school is huge, and it has been a very progressive for a long time. People, it's not as visible as people realize. But so there've been some clever entrepreneurs who partnered there. It creates a student acquisition model that's very attractive, because obviously the university extension school is providing you the student acquisition. They have to deliver a product back, and the university won't renew the contract unless the students that are going through these programs are actually achieving higher job placement objectives. And they're typically, they're programs for people who are working. So it's at night, they're on weekends, and at the convenience of working adults. So I think I do think these education to employment pipelines are really important. They don't have to all be degree, to your point, they don't have to all be degrees. They can be certificates, they can be skill levels, they can be company aligned skill levels. It's whether it's Microsoft or Salesforce, with these unique programs, that accreditation programs, or that are being developed by very specific. Microsoft, of course, has had a long-standing program there. So I think there is a very fertile place in helping universities become more agile and become more current job requirement facing, and to help them overcome what is their traditional delivery of services. So that's been very productive here. I think we're also seeing here in the U.S., we have tuition reimbursement plans that companies have. They're tax advantaged programs that allow companies to provide their employees highly discounted access to university degree programs, as well as skills credentials as well. those programs have typically not been highly utilized, which is, a little crazy. And there's a company called the Guild that has been wildly successful, an incredible female entrepreneur, Rachel Carlson, Ken Chenault, the former CEO of American Express, is the chairman. And they are driving a very high volume business and helping companies like Walmart and Disney and Chipotle and others upskill, reskill their low and middle skill workers, and really creating a pipeline to help those workers and making sure they complete, they join these educational programs, they complete these educational programs. It's good for them. It's good for retention. It's good for employer branding. We really think companies become the sort of fourth education system. If you view, pre-K, then K-12 and higher education, companies, because of really two reasons. One is, to the extent your K-12 and higher education systems are not delivering students with the skill levels they need to be competent at work, companies are going to have to bear the burden of getting them there. And to the extent that jobs are changing, obsolescence is occurring because skills are changing so quickly because of automation, this reskilling, upskilling phenomenon. So we think companies are going to have to become effectively a fourth system. And programs like the Guild, companies like the Guild, and programs like in the U.S. tuition reimbursement are going to support the upward education and the job mobility of millions of workers over time. We believe.
Subrat, any follow-up question on that?
No, thank you.
Okay, Shekhar, she was earlier talking of an extension for the university. Both Subrat and Deborah have talked of how a university can actually have an extension program for workers or that segment of the population. Would you want to take on? And the other problem is, obviously, everyone has moved online. So what is the efficacy of the online versus offline? So if you can take over on the formal education.
Sure. Hi, Deborah. So I was thinking about this digital learning. Actually, digital learning, as we all know, is not new. I mean, it's been around for more than a decade. And many of the traditional universities in US have been offering courses both digitally and in campus. My question is, actually, that digital learning which was there did not actually kill the campus. But this time around, after the AD, the new AD we are talking about, what is going to happen? Does it actually, people are going to still go back to the campus, or are they going to be very comfortable with digital learning? I mean, what didn't happen, will it happen now?
Yeah, I think that, I think certainly, if you can afford the luxury of doing it, I mean, it's really a time value of, it's an opportunity cost to spend 4 years on a campus. I think if you've done that, you agree that the benefits of the network, the people you meet, the social interactions, interactions with faculty, is invaluable for sure. Can you get some of that online? For sure. Can you get all of it? Probably no. I think so I think that the universities, the traditional universities that make it through this financial crisis, I think people will be anxious to be able to get back to a traditional university. I don't think that's probably going to happen in any kind of normal form until the fall of 2021. But it will happen in some kind of jerry-rigged fashion in 2020. I think the reality is, in the U.S. at least, and I'm sure the numbers are the same or somewhat similar in India and elsewhere, is we only 30% of our population has a 4-year degree. So we have a huge portion. I think what we're trying to, what many of the online universities, whether it's Purdue or Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors, which are some of the biggest, have been trying to do is increase access, right? So one of our big issues is you've got jobs that require, whether it's 80% or whatever number you take from McKinsey or whatever, what percentage of jobs are going to require some form of higher education credential. It's a high percentage, and it's certainly a higher percentage than the percentage of people actually getting higher education credentials. So I think that gap is going to support, that's going to support universities staying physical, but then building big online programs. Southern New Hampshire, which is I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's one of the most innovative universities in the U.S., bar none. They have a physical campus in New Hampshire, logically, and during COVID they've announced, Paul LeBlanc, as their president, announced a radical restructuring of the cost to basically push the cost of attending the physical campus down to basically the level at which federal loans and grants would support it. So you wouldn't have to. So a much larger percentage of individuals could afford to attend Southern New Hampshire physically. The online programs are already very affordable. So I think I think some of the dynamic that's an interesting dynamic in the U.S. because one of the problems for the physical campus is just how expensive it has gotten to go to university in the U.S. So there's some really interesting innovation happening with entrepreneurs pushing, creating new solutions that push price down. We're an investor in a company called Outlier. That's the co-founder of a company called Masterclass, which is basically taking famous professors from world-class universities and having them teach calculus and psychology and the core basic courses online and in a highly produced fashion. They're great instructors. And you get accreditation today from the University of Pittsburgh, and you pay $400 a course, which is a substantial discount from a typical course. So there's all kinds of great innovation happening there. Again, widening access. So I think, to come back to my long-winded answer to your question, I think there will certainly be a continued appetite for students who want to go into a physical campus environment for 4 years. But I think that what this is doing is probably opening people's minds, making them realize it's not a path that everybody has to take. There are shorter paths to jobs, and just like the anecdote about Google versus Harvard. And I think that in this generation, whether it's Gen Z or other millennials, I think there is a new willingness to think about how you shortcut access to a great career.
Right. So, just picking on the great professor going and teaching, we know that a synchronous classroom has a much more effective approach than an asynchronous material, but synchronous is not scalable. But with asynchronous, maybe the dropout rates might be higher. So how do we solve this problem?
Interesting. See, I think it's interesting. So this company is very early, Outlier, but they they'll launch more courses in the fall. But have 2 courses, calculus and psychology, and taught by professors from MIT and Davidson and Yale, and I mean it's an extraordinary teachers who have an extraordinary presence. So they're doing so it's asynchronous in incredible production. They create all kinds of, there's all kinds of peer interaction, whether it's on Slack, they're in cohorts, they're helping each other, students are helping each other. They can confer, through group discussion with the professor. There are all kinds of ways to address how, when students get stuck and need help and assistance. And interestingly, again, very early, so small cohort, not scaled cohorts yet, but the completion rates in calculus have been superior to the on-campus synchronous delivery, and students have performed incredibly well on it's calculus is interesting. He started with calculus because it turns out that calculus, I'll get the number wrong, it's something like $8 billion is wasted on college calculus because there's so much, because it's so hard to teach well. And students drop out. So it's just this whole subject area, which is really important, particularly, if you want to move on and take pursue a STEM related major. and yet it has very low retention rates at site-based institutions, across the country. So anyway, that's why they tackled that, and because the curation of the course and the careful attention to peer-based, cohorts and feedback, and always staying on top of how the student's doing and making sure. I think we'll be able to find asynchronous solutions that actually are very engaging, very appealing. But you're right, they've typically just been kind of things you put up. I'd argue, Sol Khan's a pretty, it's a very engaging asynchronous, delivery of lessons. I think Sol, did a wonderful job when he started that. So I think we'll, because you're right, you can't scale it if it's all synchronous. So I think we'll see continued innovation and frankly, the use of AI and things like that to basically follow students really carefully and see when they're getting off track and when they're getting stuck, and how do we help them, and how do we introduce new tools that can really help them accelerate the pace of their learning. I think there's some really interesting innovation happening kind of around learning acceleration, and help, tools and things that can really help students get better faster. So I actually am quite hopeful that the asynchronous delivery can get better and better and better.
Okay, I'll stop right here.
Deborah, I'll take off from what Shekhar just said. Are we, because we are ultimately now talking of an outcome which a classroom can do versus an online can do, are we reducing the entire learning that happens in a campus to what a numerical outcome would be? Because there is a lot of learning in a campus in terms of learning to behave with people, the societal interaction, and all those things. Are we reducing it to a number at some point?
I'm not sure I totally understand that question. I totally agree. When you're having interactions on campus, you're picking up things. Some of my dearest friends are the friends I made on campus in college, in my 4 years of college. So they've been an important part of my network for the rest of my life. Now, arguably you can get the same thing. If you pursue a passion, a passion around work, and you end up in a great work environment, arguably it has similar attributes. If you end up in the right team with the right people, with the right mentor, with the right, all the right trappings. I think the reality is not everyone can afford the opportunity cost of 4 years of college, and which is already reflected in the numbers. And so I think we need to continue to be coming up with solutions that give access to 100% of the population, if they want it, 100% of the population, not 30%, to be able to get access to degrees they're going to make, that are going to allow them to go on and as we like to say, participate in the future, meaning have a good job. So it's hard to you can't discount the incredible social and everything else contributions you get in a campus environment. I just think the reality is it's a little bit of a luxury, and not feasible for everyone to be able to tap into that.
Aakash, would you take over? Because I think home tuitions has been a big part, test prep is a big part. Increasingly, most people spend as much time off the classroom studying as they spend in the classroom studying. So I request Aakash to take over from here, please. Aakash?
Oh, thank you, Mahesh. So Deborah, my question is that, because of the COVID situation, obviously the viewership, the use of edtech and online content and the platforms have increased significantly. Is this increase, just for the period of COVID, or do you think that it's an opportunity for us to really leverage and transform, or rather transfer kids from an offline experience to an online experience? Having said that, so are kids behaving in a way to keep them busy and in a structure, or are they really, becoming part of the continuous learning, as we all are saying that the learning shouldn't stop, even if you're in a COVID lockdown.
Yeah, I think that I think the question of whether this is sort of a temporary phenomenon or that will go away post COVID. It's interesting. There's some data actually already available. Is an important question, and I think there certainly will be companies that, and I think probably some will be smaller tutoring, online learning platforms that people have migrated to, that to the extent that may or may not have great engagement and results. And so I think there certainly will be companies where it really goes back to normal after COVID. I think we have this, one of our sort of mantras is that disproportionate gains accrue to the leaders in a category. And I think what we're seeing across, globally, and Baiju would be another, certainly an example of this, is that the companies that are benefiting most, and I think will hold the change most permanently, are those that already had very material positions, right? So, Baiju here, Class Dojo is a company we're invested in, has 70 million plus parents, students, teachers, importantly, on the platform, has for years. It's a free platform for schools. Their paid model is a parent pay model. They have seen unprecedented. They were already in massive, very high percentage of K-8 schools, not only in the U.S. but globally, and have seen massive upticks, deeper penetration. So it's a highly trusted brand. I mean, just to give an example. So I think to the extent you have companies with well-established positions, highly trusted by faculty or by teachers or by parents and students, all they're doing is increasing penetration, and they will come out of this more pervasive than they were going in. They were already delivering. I think to somebody's earlier point, digital learning is not a new phenomenon. They were already delivering something that many people were very happy with. And this has just given them a chance to actually, up level that. We think these companies have all seen a couple of years step change in terms of their business models. Duolingo is interesting. They actually, just talking to them recently, they have a position in China. So China is interesting to look at because obviously COVID's come, they're back at work. And it would appear the numbers are holding. So all the digital players, and we haven't peeled apart, Talon, New Oriental, and the leaders numbers yet. 'Cause you haven't gotten them yet from the public markets. But Duolingo would tell you they had a doubling of their business in China during COVID, and have really not seen. They expect a 10 to 15% retracing, but they really haven't seen a retracing at all yet. And again, they believe there will be at least a slight one. But I think that to the extent it's about forming habit, and education, learning is a habit, just like bad habits are. So so I think to the extent that you've got a company that's really appealing, and you've had this crazy opportunity in this tragedy to help people develop habits around usage, then I think that you're gonna end up having very nice retention, coming out of it. In terms of what kids are doing, this is obviously I'm happily my kids are all adults, so I have not had to be running the Quazo school for the gifted and talented at home, as one of my partners calls his homeschool. It's been interesting to watch. It's been interesting to watch two of my partners who have young kids, grapple with the phenomenon. So I think it's hard. It depends on what role the parents have been able to play, how active they've been able to be versus working. So in terms of knowing how they've been spending their time. I think it just depends. And I think it depends on the district. I think the school districts who had a real, had a real plan and are holding, here in Chicago, where they're trying to tie sort of end of year grades, not so much to actual literal, tests, but to actually, did you come, did you show up? Because we have gotten devices to all the students. Were you there? Were you engaged? Did you, and that, I kind of like that. I mean, it's taken really back to can we encourage students, and Chicago is a very low, 87% of the district is free and reduced lunch, which is our lowest income category. So it's a really we're a very poor district. And anyway, I'm impressed by what they've done. They have great district leadership. To try to, actually have kids enjoy the learning, and measure them on whether they showed up and enjoyed it, as opposed to, you've got to take XYZ tests. And I don't know what's happened in India, but the testing fallout's really interesting because, none of the traditional, SAT, ACT, I guess the IB's not doing, all these tests have been dropped. And that's going to be a whole nother area of pretty interesting impact for all of us to kind of come back and study. What did that mean for college admissions? You basically had all colleges have to go test optional. We'd already had a big movement here in the US for schools going test optional, and this forced everybody to go test optional. We'll see how many people stick with it. What does that do to, that's a whole nother layer that I think is pretty interesting, because we weren't prepared, I don't think globally, for the most part, to be able to take our testing systems online. And, there have been remote proctoring companies have been off the charts in terms of volume, because they've been pulled in to support, this scramble to take things like the AP and everything else online. So that's a whole nother area that's kind of fascinating. Is that we'll all be able to sit back and say, in this debate about testing, we actually now have this test period to look and see what the impact was of not having students taking tests all the time.
No, it's interesting you mentioned, Deborah, about proctor testing, because the last data that I have for early 2020, there were about 4,300 plus startups in the edtech space, and surprisingly, they all are serving 8% of the market, which is the CBSE and ICSE school curriculum. I mean, most of these startups are actually creating content, technology, platform, around this market. So what happens to the 92% of the state syllabus, state curriculum, state pedagogy students? I mean, will they ever get access to technology-led education or not? So in your experience, country with multiple education systems, have those systems moved to one system, or the companies have innovated, in parallel for each and every system? So what is more efficient? How do you see, I see this as a great opportunity for entrepreneurs, and even for the prominent education players to lobby and move, state syllabus to a common syllabus, so that
to a more common standards.
Access, yeah. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's funny. We had this very controversial movement in the U.S. for what we call Common Core. And it was just a sensible move to a common, set of standards. And it unfortunately, it was driven by state governors too. That's the crazy part. Anyway, it fell victim to politics, which unfortunately happens often in our K-12 system. That having been said, I think that the roots of it remain for the most part, our state by state curriculums, while companies still have to tailor some things around specific state, we actually are today in the U.S. Have much more of a common set of objectives, and probably mainly because we actually the testing at the end, there are only a a few sets of tests that you can, that the majority of school districts implement, whether it's the SAT, the ACT, which are pretty much the same, very similar tests at this point, or some other more formative testing systems. They're actually all pretty tight now. So I think that drives the curriculum to be tighter and more consistent with each other. So I actually think that used to be a horrible problem for entrepreneurs. I think it's gotten a lot better. And I think we've got traditional publishers in the US under tremendous pressure, both in K-12 and higher education. So I think the ability of entrepreneurs to build curriculum that can be sold into all 50 states and and all the districts underneath them, without a whole lot of customization is, I think we're pretty much there. And I think that's really important. You're right. It's a big opportunity for lobbying, and I think hopefully you guys aren't quite as political. India's not quite as political as the U.S. is related to things like this. But
you're mistaken, Deborah. You're mistaken there.
We may have great policies, but the philosophy remains the same.
It's funny, isn't it? It's funny, but it's
politicians everywhere are the same, so that doesn't change at all.
Politics are politics.
Yeah.
So it's but that is a very important change. It is really hard for entrepreneurs to have to customize, for each different district or region.
And just a last question. Obviously the end objective of education and continuous education is to get a great job. Looking at the current numbers in India, in last 1 month, 111 million people have lost jobs. So that's huge. So, the data was, at the beginning of March was about 267 million, suddenly shot to 370 million. So with this kind of unemployment coming in, and it is very unlike the 2008 situation where, people could, because of crisis, could go back to college. Now they even can't go to college, to pass that year of lull. Right. So, with this, how do you see universities which have a 1-year program and they were surviving, let's take it, in case like university like INSEAD or, how would they survive, this onslaught, because they can't even start their batches? And will the online education be accepted, for people in future as a credible education, to get a job?
Yeah, I think that, the good news is, I think we've made enormous progress on online education being acceptable. And the most important thing is that employers accept it, right?
And then even just in the Indian context, coming from a very, very mechanized workforce mindset, unimaginative learning, a lot of overhang of colonial education, the British time. That's how the people who are paying, they were educated like that. And, when they talk about online education. So in the Indian context, if you could, just share some light on it.
I'm not, I don't want to get out over my skis and not know enough about what everyone's dealing with, but I do, I do know, and your board member from Ashoka, it does sound like there's been some nice success with Indian universities going online, right? His anecdote was that students are more engaged and faculty have enjoyed it, and much to their surprise. And so I think that you hear things like that from a great university like that. I had a call yesterday with the CEO of iNurture, and they're seeing lots of Ashwin. They're seeing lots of activity from universities going. So I think it's for India. It's probably a great forced exercise, right? Because I think the U.S. I think to an earlier point one of you guys made is the U.S. began to put things online not well. It was bad quality in the beginning. It was just throwing PDFs up and whatever. It's gotten better. It's not perfect. It's got to keep getting better. It's kind of bad. That's why back to these things, companies like Outlier. But we had, the acceptance here, I think it took some slogging, but I think that there's very high acceptance today from employers. And I think for India, to see high brand universities, online is probably, quite a good thing. Here it's being made fun of that, you thought you were going to, Cornell and you're basically at Apollo, University of Phoenix, but which there's probably an interesting point there. If University of Phoenix and Cornell are doing the same, actually Cornell has has long had a very strong online eCornell product. But anyway, so I think seeing more of these sort of name brands, go on is probably a good exercise, and helps. That's why I think MOOCs were so helpful, because they did say, Princeton went online, and, they didn't give their degree out, but they did have their teachers go on. So I would think this is a pretty interesting exercise for India, to get people more accepting of getting out of the box on higher education and not being so fixated on brand. And because I know it is a brand conscious culture, and if, by the way, less students are going abroad which will be to the detriment of great universities in the U.S., that's for sure. And begin to seek good alternatives in India. I don't know. I think it's an interesting positive catalyst for India in higher education. I don't think it's positive for the U.S. It's going to restructure. It's going to restructure our system, which may be positive in the long run, but it's going to take 5. I think it'll take 5 years to shake out. But
I think I'll jump in now, Aakash. I'll just, my last question, Deborah, because I know you're running out of time. See, you earlier talked of inequity, right? And yesterday I was talking to a chain of schools, a founder of a chain of schools, and they have very high-end schools, mid-level schools, and schools for the underprivileged. So the top-level schools fund the underprivileged schools in that sense, and that's how it's a trust, right? And they said that the top-level schools adapted very, very freely, whereas at the bottom level they didn't have even a mobile or a computer, so they couldn't do anything. And then talk about the bandwidth and all those things, right? So
right.
One is that part of it, of whether how equal would it be. I understand Ashoka doing it is very well, I think it is normal. If it doesn't do it well, I'll be very surprised and I'll be very upset with it. But when you keep going down the ladder, there might be an issue. That's the first part of it. And the second part of it is, I know that a lot of students have filed cases on universities saying that they didn't pay for enough online thing, so they need a fee refund. Do you think over a period of time, this will make education less expensive and to that extent more affordable?
Yes. I think it's really interesting. So it's really important because for a long time, high-end universities going online, delivering online courses, have charged the same thing. So if you get your master's in education at the University of Southern California, which is facilitated by a company called 2U, you pay the same thing as if you went physically, which has always not made sense to me. But anyway, so I think what you're seeing is universities already breaking out to create differentiated pricing for online education. So University of North Carolina, very prestigious public university here, they've already taken an aggressive step to reduce the cost, reduce the pricing. Harvard said they will reduce the pricing. If Harvard Business School is online, they will charge less. And they have a long way to go to reduce the price. So I think, yes, I think it will actually begin to drive down cost in a way that should have happened a while ago. And I think that is, of course, a good thing, a very good thing, because the cost, right now the cost issue here and the student debt issue, at $1.6 trillion or whatever it is insane. So yes, I think it's going to create and I think entrepreneurs are creating all kinds of big pressure on this, whether it's for-profit and not-for-profit entrepreneurs. Some really great not-for-profit, I've mentioned, Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors. those are very high quality, very inexpensive programs. Arizona State University, very high quality, very affordable programs. So I think that pressure will be part of the restructuring of the higher education in the U.S. And I think it will be a really good outcome for students.
Yeah. So as a supplementary to that, Deborah, and this is my last question, that's a promise. You actually have an entry test, which is a SAT and ACT, or in India, we have JEE, which allows students to get into an institution. And removing the distinction between online and offline, if you have an exit test also on the other side, where again you get a score, do you think it will blur the online versus offline debate, because you actually have an entry path and then you have an exit path on the other side, and everyone takes the same?
I'm losing you a little bit. I think you mean what you're saying is that what you're saying is that people have the
Hello?
same. Yeah, you there?
Can you hear me, Deborah? Hello?
I can now. I can
can't
now.
hear you. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. Okay. I'm just saying that is there a possibility that if we have an exit test also to blur the distinction between online and offline, it works for everyone?
Yeah, I think one of the things we don't do, forget the online offline. I think it's kind of crazy that we don't test the efficacy of your college experience. So it is, and I guess the way we test it is by job placement. So inherently today, the way a student can assess whether their 4 years was worth the money or the time is their job placement. I think online. I don't know if an exit test will equilibrate the two. I think an entry test alone probably, if the fact is you're being admitted to these programs through the same entry assessment, and the cutoffs, the cut scores, whatever, are the same, then that's, by definition, you've equilibrated the programs. And then if you did an exit test, you obviously would then be testing the efficacy of the learning, which I think makes sense, period. But today we don't have that.
I think we've come to the end of this thing, Deborah. I know that you're running out of time also. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Shubrat. Thanks, Shubrat. Thanks, Hari.
Bye.
Thanks, Shubrat. Thanks, Aakash.
Bye.
Thank you, Mahesh.
Thank you so much.